It's the 15th day of March 2022. I'm Dana Durnford, also known as the Nuclear Proctologist.org. You can call in at 709-589-4406. Not that you need me to say the numbers, but in case you're looking down. Fat chance we have a big poll tonight. Anybody? Does the Fukushima nuclear meltdowns cover-up prove the nuclear industry is insidiously, hideously, monstrously, honestly evil? We have a resounding yes at 100%, which is the correct answer. Sadly, horrifyingly, there is no checks and balances on the nuclear industry, and it has been able to run its course without no repercussions, no incentives not to be evil, and so it became evil. You like this headline, April 6, 2011, Fukushima reactor leak. Does this look like a leak to somebody? Anybody? Fukushima reactor leak was plugged with liquid glass, which is a mixture of sawdust and newspaper. Just imagine, sawdust and newspaper fixed a 190-foot nuclear meltdown. So it shows you the industry is a lunatic industry. It's actually insane. I got a couple of other quick examples before we get into the third show of Fukushima's 11th anniversary. I played this clip for you last night. Before I play the clip again for you, he's from Simon Fraser University, British Columbia, Canada. He equates the radiation with smoking 30 cigarettes a day, or flying on an airplane, or standing in front of granite. He's actually supposed to be a professor, believe it or not. Living near a coal fire plant, you get a bigger dose than living near a nuclear power plant. Sleeping next to somebody for 8 hours, you get a bigger dose than living next to a nuclear power plant, which is what he's going to say right here.
And living next to a nuclear power station can actually contribute less than your loved one when it comes to... with myself as one of the principal investigators, was awarded $6 million. And living next to
And so living next to a nuclear power plant is less radiation than sleeping next to somebody. This is absurdness taken to extremes. And that's what happens when there's no checks and balances, no incentive not to be evil. This is Robert Gale. Robert Gale does organ transplants. This should frighten the living daylights out of every human that watches this.
And then the final slide will just show you, where on that thermometer does something like Fukushima lie. Now, you'll hear a lot of detailed scientific discussions of our uncertainties, that we shouldn't really be talking about point estimates. We should be talking about ranges. But I think what people want to know, what the public want to know, what I have to deal with, and when I'm in Tokyo, and people ask me, or the workers ask me, what is my risk from getting 50 millisieverts? They want to know really where. I'm sorry, if you can go back. Where?
Let me go back and show you the comparison. So to him, working at the nuclear meltdown itself, this is what he's talking about, the workers. Remember, this guy irradiates humans to do organ transplants. So he murders people to do transplants that can't work. Smoking 14 cigarettes a day is worse than working at the nuclear meltdown, according to Robert Gale. Eating 25 cups of peanut butter is worse than working at the nuclear meltdown. Spending 20 days in New York City is worse than working at multiple nuclear meltdowns and fuel pools. Driving 600 kilometers in a car. And my favorite one, of course, is kayaking for 15 minutes is more dangerous. You get a bigger dose than working at a nuclear meltdown. This is a man who, for a living, transplants organs. Oh, and limbs. And he's lying to you. Every one of these are not a lie, they're incredible fabrications, insidious fabrications. And there's many Robert Boyles out there, or Gale rather, out there, that are in professors or academics or working for major institutions and setting policies for governments. That should terrify you, that we live on a planet where that is considered normal, that is considered acceptable. You can't have a future, your children can't have a future, your loved ones can't have a future with Robert Gales in positions of authority. Certainly, that person deserves to be in jail for the rest of his life. And lo and behold, Imperial College, with his cohorts like Geraldine Thomas. Fukushima continued. Nuclear power is not a climate crisis solution. Greenpeace. The traitors, also known as Greenpeace. Greenpeace Japan, who never held Asby Brown and Safecast responsible a single time, by the way, these are mass murderers on a whole different scale, released the following statement on the 11th anniversary of the Great Japanese Earthquake and Fukushima Daiichi Nuclear Power Station. Okay, so that's Reactor 4. Greenpeace has never came out and disavowed these. This is just a tiny fraction of media, by the way, that done this. But I used to tweet this to Greenpeace, different organizations, including Japan's Greenpeace, and ask them to publish it, to tweet it out, because that would pull the rug right out from under the nuclear industry. Here's 4 major medias, the editors, producers, the owners, not counting the so-called revolting journalist. The word journalist is now a euphemism for murderer and genocide. It's just, the whole story is just, it's so important. It's never too late to say no. It's not too late to try and do something. It's never going to be too late. You have to, this is what we're supposed to do. We're not supposed to have all these lawyers stabbing the entire planet to death. The example of the disaster-affected areas, says Greenpeace, which have continued moving towards recovery, really, over the last 11 years, despite the unprecedented crisis and nuclear accident, has given us great hope. Really? They're shipping food from 14 irradiated prefectures worldwide and poisoning people. Greenpeace is no longer a Greenpeace, so to speak. It's a lobby. It's controlled opposition. They have to go. They don't have a right to exist. In fact, they don't even get the right to breathe the same air as us. They should be abolished from all society forever. That chapter of history is a deadly chapter in history. Recently, the Japanese government and electric power companies are actively promoting the notion that nuclear power plants are low carbon. They've been doing it since the Paris Accord in 2015, actually, in France, in scumbag France. I'm going to show you a bunch of nuclear power plants. They're surrounded by farms. I'm not going to show you all because I got 100 of them that I went out and just picked up like nothing to it. Why are nuclear power plants, that's Huntington B? This is a future nuclear power plant built right in massive farmlands. Why are they doing that? Well, because the reactors are constantly hemorrhaging radiation. You eat the food, get sick, and die. And the only winners is Big Pharma and the genocide machine itself. The depopulation. This is depopulation. This is a future nuclear power plant in the United Kingdom surrounded by farms. It's the easiest, quickest, most efficient way to poison the entire population besides a nuclear meltdown. I have over 100 nuclear power plants. I stopped at 100. Every power plant, I looked for an aerial view, except, not everyone, but 98.9% or something. It's a mass murder machine. And because food you eat more than once, that kind of food, you buy it, it poisons all your loved ones at the same time. All of you in the household are poisoned at the one time. That's not a crime, that's insanity. It's just genocide in overdrive. Fukushima continued nuclear power, back to that story. Of the 10 nuclear reactors that have been restarted in Japan, most of them are mixed oxide fuel. And they're getting their fuel from United Kingdom, from Sellafield, and from Francis La Hague. Francis La Hague has over 500 security guards. Only 5 have been installed, equipment mandated under anti-terrorism measures at 10 nuclear power plants. They're growing food right alongside the nuclear waste, and they're growing it in a nuclear wasteland and shipping it worldwide. If that's not terrorism, what is? Apologize for being human. Back to your story. The Fukushima Daiichi nuclear accident is still ongoing. Oh yeah, this is the plutonium fallout. This model is not based on the real numbers. It's based on a fraction of a percent, a single percent. And it's deadly for the entire planet. Meanwhile, 150 tons of new radioactive water was being generated every day in 2021. First off, in 2013 they had 1,000 tanks. 2014 they had 1,000 tanks. In 2017 they had 900 tanks. Try walking with both of your feet on the ground, flat like that. See how that works for you. Japan will have to dump the radioactive water 2019. And this line here, 1,000 tanks. 2021, 1,000 tanks. Excuse me. Japanese government decided last year it will release approximately 129 million tons, which is 1,000 tanks. And I just showed you they had 1,000 tanks in 2013. There was actually 1,200 tanks in 2014. TEPCO to abandon the REVA system. They had 2 water filtration systems. 2014 August, almost the end of the year, 3/4 through the year of 2014 and 3/4. For the last 3 years, the system has been unused and kept out of operations. The ALP system, the Advanced Liquid Processing System, is yet to function reliably. That's in April 2014. So some of the stories they're claiming is that they're filtering the water and then pouring it back on the nuclear meltdowns. First off, that's the one thing you wouldn't want to do, because you can't actually filter the water, as I just showed you. Also, the groundwater bypass operation, where they're going to pump it from behind, has not worked. It's failing to reduce the water from entering the plant. TEPCO also failed to install a fence that would restrict contamination from leaking into the Pacific, because you can't. Because it builds up behind the fence and you can't get on the property anymore because it's a lethal dose. Even though they claimed that the reason was $1 billion, the government has spent hundreds of billions already. TEPCO's ice wall operation is not meeting expectations. The ice wall is not progressing according to plan. They are yet to form the ice stopper. So the big question, of course, is why didn't you build a real wall? And the reason I say that is pretty simple. High-priced ice wall. They used 260,000 people, and when you divided their budget, it meant everybody made almost $1,200 if you didn't buy the ice wall itself, if you just had 260,000 people working on it. They lie like there's no tomorrow. And it's lethal for all the species. We are being exterminated. 260,000 people. You could have built it with 100 people if you built an actual wall that you don't have to maintain forever, per se, in the context of, it's just, they've done everything to kill the planet. The nuclear industry and International Atomic Energy has okayed every facet. Yeah. Just dump it in the ocean. Oh, don't worry, we're just gonna, we'll have the media, we'll control any opposition, and we'll only show controlled opposition. Back to your story that never ends from Greenpeace. 150 tons of new radioactive water are being generated every day in 2021. First off, the reactors, when they're not melting down, need 1 million gallons, 4,500 tons, every minute, 1,440 minutes a day. So the reactors can fill up all the tanks on site 6 times a day. When it melts down, you actually need more water because you're going from 600 degrees to 9,000. The industry is pure evilness, every facet of it. After the nuclear disaster, the Japanese government promoted coal-fired power generation, which only further accelerated the climate change. No. Man-made radiation is climate change. This model is only 16 days of radioactive fallout from France based on 1/100 of a million numbers, by the way. Not based on the inventories that were lost, the nuclear meltdowns, the fuel pools. So you have this invisible cloud covers the entire planet, and it doesn't stop after 16 days or 16 years or 160,000 years or 16 million years. It's still going to be pulsing energy at the speed of light every second. Each of the atoms. This is absurdness because that's global warming. Pulsing energy every second at the speed of light forever. And it kills all the species it comes in contact with. Flora, fauna, bacteria, you name it. In increments over time, of course. And so it looks normal. There's no species on the planet in a few years. People say, well, there was never no birds. There was never no cows. Maintaining nuclear power generation for the purpose of decarbonization is nothing short of a deliberate act of self-imposed harm. I think Greenpeace should be tried in a public court for crimes against humanity, not the fake United Nations one. Air samples in Tokyo are 270 times more contaminated with gamma than global weapons fallout peak. What about alpha? What about beta? What about neutrons like uranium and plutonium and americium? What about the hot particles? If you put that to the equation, Tokyo is the last planet with just that number that you want to ever be in, where 36 million people are being cooked to death as we speak. As a nation has deeply suffered the devastation about nuclear power plant accidents and nuclear bombs. I'll tell you about Japan's nuclear bomb. This was a really enlightening story. Prime Minister Suga abandons, who replaced Shinzo Abe, who quit, and then Suga quit. Now we have the current useful idiot. Suga abandons appeal of the Black Rain Habakusha lawsuit. Habakusha were the victims of the bombing, who were there when it got bombed at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. August the 6th, 1945, and August the 9th. Ministry officials long argued the black rain, not the nuclear fallout, but the black rain, that ingestion of food and water would only add up to a small amount of radiation that would be insufficient to cause any health problems. So what you just seen there was that for 76 years, the Japanese government refused to acknowledge the people of Hiroshima at the bombing got sick from radiation. And the reason they done that, of course, is because you couldn't build the cities back on the nuclear wastelands if you admit that there was health problems. And you couldn't study the human lab rats for 76 years if you admit that there's adverse side effects. So for 76 years, the Japan government refuses to acknowledge that their own people who suffered an attack from a foreign country had any adverse effects from the radiation fallout, despite the fact that there's endless amount of studies. And this study actually claimed atomic bomb health benefits. Can you possibly get any eviler than a study like that? But that's normal in the academic community. That's what they are. They're actually evil. And they thrive in it. Rediscovery of an old article reporting the area around the epicenter in Hiroshima was heavily contaminated with radiation. Again, they use the word residual, which is an abomination, which is an incredible betrayal, but that's what we're used to. That is normal when it comes to nuclear betrayal. That goes without saying. Indicating the explosion doses of the A-bomb survivors were largely underestimated. And that another study showing long-term related health effects in a unique human population, the victims of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Radiation as a weapon of mass destruction. Breast cancer in Japanese A-bomb survivors. Global transport of plutonium from Nagasaki to the Arctic. But no harm at ground zero. How do these people not cut each other's throat? I wonder, how does that actually work? Evil just knows when they're around other evil, I guess. The evaluation of adverse events in the atomic bomb survivors receiving curative intent radiation therapy. So you took the victims who were irradiated and murdered them with more radiation, so there's no witnesses. Dead man, dead woman tells no tales. Like Robert Gale does for a living, and Geraldine Thomas, and thousands and thousands and thousands more like them. 11 years after the tsunami and nuclear disaster, around 12% of Fukushima was once declared unsafe. Really? Half of Japan, 55 countries wouldn't buy the food from it because it was too radioactive. I think that's a little more than 12%. This year, 5 former residents of Fukushima, which is the community where the nuclear meltdowns are still melting down, returned to live there on a trial basis because they were coerced and deceived and manipulated and tricked into going into a nuclear wasteland so the nuclear industry can get another little star on their papers. They moved back 2.5 miles, around almost 4 kilometers, from these ongoing multiple nuclear meltdowns. Plant operator TEPCO faces opposition to a plan to release more than 1 million tons of water at the site. It's absurd. You can't treat radioactive water. The filter becomes obscenely radioactive immediately. The United Nations, which is 193 militaries, and there's no such thing as a good military, by the way, did not directly harm the health of the local residents, and that higher thyroid cancer rates in local children were likely due to more stringent diagnosis. You know, in 2012, there was extra 865,000 cancers, according to the Cancer Center in Japan, symmetrically throughout the entire country. The evidence is so overwhelming, I literally don't know why I don't pull the rest of my hair out of my head. We counted the tanks. There's not 1,000 tanks. There's 750. On March 11, 2011, the meltdown, with no S, of 3, it's actually 4 nuclear reactors and 8 fuel pools. The fuel pools have decades of reactor cores stored in them at the top of the building, because they're gone too. Such liars became the world's second worst nuclear disaster. This is absurdness, by the way, because they're claiming Chernobyl, a 200-ton reactor, is worse than 4 reactors and 8 fuel pools. The reactor cores in Japan are 800 tons. And it's pure uranium, pure plutonium. It's it's hundreds of thousands of times worse than the Chernobyl reactors, which are graphite. They also claim 165,000 residents were evacuated. It was actually 480,000, almost 500,000 people. And about 4 years ago, they started using that number there, and now that's the only number you're generally going to see. The plant owner, which is nationalized, doesn't exist anymore, is now the government of Japan, but they keep calling them TEPCO. The International Research Institute for Nuclear Decommissioning of Japan. Is this some kind of sick and sadistic and twisted joke to call the International Research Institute for Nuclear Decommissioning of Japan? It's like calling the devil Cinderella. They claim as much as 880 metric tons of fuel still remains in the reactors. The reactors had 800 tons in them. These are boiling water reactors, and they have 800 tons. Lie after lie after lie after lie after lie, because there's no checks and balances. And so now evil has finally destroyed our planet. 30 to 40 year plan for decommissioning reactors could not be achieved because it would be impossible even in 100 years. Well, the consensus is actually 10,000 years. Who's going to be around to tell the difference? The Japanese government is sticking with its decision in April of last year to discharge the nuclear contaminated water into the sea that doesn't exist. The fuel pool, or the tanks, are actually empty. The tanks are there to trick you into thinking they didn't kill the Pacific or poison the planet. That's all the tanks are there for. They had 1,000 tanks in 2013, 1,000 tanks in 2022. And I already showed you 1,000 tanks. 1,000 tanks. Here it is again. 2013, 1,000 tanks. 2014, 1,200 tanks. You can't remove the radiation like they're claiming. There's over 1,000 radioactive isotopes. There's actually, TEPCO is unable to bring the contaminated water under control. The ALP systems has yet to function reliably, which means it can never function. If you run 2.2 sieverts per hour, because that's what we're talking about, through the filter, and we're only talking about beta, we're not acknowledging gamma, alpha, and neutrons in this equation, by the way. It's ludicrousness. It's like they went out and found the biggest idiots they could put them in charge. How do you say tritium is all around us? Professor Brendan Kennedy of the School of Chemistry at the University of Sydney. Reactor in Canada is releasing 200 trillion becquerels of tritium every year. Actually, 200 trillion is a very, very little compared to the real number. Okay, let me explain this to you. Maybe I'll find another way to explain it to you. 200 trillion, which is, don't get me wrong, that's a lot, but it's actually not the real number or even close to it. So a gram would have, let's say, 120 curies in a gram of cesium. So it's 76 times, or 76 billion. 76 billion times 36 times 120 so it's 341 trillion becquerels per gram. So what they're saying is less than a gram a year. That's what makes nuclear so evil, by the way, because there's so much of it per gram of the atoms. So naturally occurring tritium is extremely rare on Earth. Natural stuff. So when Professor Brendan Kennedy, the School of Chemistry at the University of Sydney, that's quite the handle, you should be able to trust that guy, right? Says tritium is all around us. He's not being honest, is he? Because he's employing natural stuff. Tritium is also a byproduct of the production of electricity by nuclear power plants. And the name of the isotope is formed from the Greek word meaning third. It's tritium 3H because natural tritium is called tritium. Man-made tritium, anthropogenic tritium, is tritium 3H. Fission probably produces more tritium than all other sources. Not probably, but does. Drinking large amounts of alcohol, by the way, will reduce the biological half-life of tritiated water in your body. That's an interesting tidbit, isn't it? So the International Atomic Energy was invited at the invitation of Japan. An investigative team, which is laughable even on the best of days, of the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is 193 militaries that spend a lot of money every year on nuclear and don't want nuclear to get a bad name. It's called controlled opposition, and it's also called insidiously evil scumbags. The scumbags visited Japan last month to complete its first, in 11 years, its first fake investigation in 11 years. First off, they're not going to go take samples from the tank because it's 2 sieverts an hour. If you fill the tank up at 2.2 sieverts per liter, it's 1.4 million sieverts per tank. That means if you stood over here, you're going to die if there's no other tank, just this tank here. So the question is, how can you build the other tanks if you fill up one of these tanks? What I tell you is the documentation. What they tell you is the cover story for the documentation. The Deputy Director General of a corporation. Good for you. You work for a corporation and you got a great title called Deputy Director General. You don't get to tell me jack shit because I kick the shit out of you if you do. You ain't no Deputy Director General. You're a murderer-in-chief, maybe. So the government invited the agency to conduct a safety review, which is really interesting because there's only homeless and destitute and victims of society and the immigrants who don't speak the language at the site. It seems highly unlikely they actually even went to the site. There's no credible evidence showing they're at the site. The Drone Federation of India signed a memorandum of understanding with a Japanese testing facility to strengthen the country's drone sector. So India is going to test its drones out in a nuclear wasteland at Fukushima. They're not going to help mitigate it. They're not going to tell us the truth or show us the actual footage. Nuclear energy poses a serious threat to Manila Times. Well, some people might be more honest than that. Nuclear power generation is the only invention that can destroy the future of humans and by proxy all other species, which is what we're seeing happening, yeah? Fewer sign up as volunteer firefighters due to the danger risk, particularly in Fukushima, Miyagi, and Iwate prefectures. In fact, a lot of firefighters died during 3/11. 254 volunteer firefighters died or were listed as missing in 2011. Yeah, from radio. A lot of them would have died from radiation. So now they get discount coupons for volunteer firefighters to use at restaurants. Japan to finish radioactive soil transfer. Another story, another play down, another propaganda. Endless propaganda. That's what we get, is endless propaganda. The facility they're going to bring it to straddles Fukushima towns of Futaba is on the north side of the nuclear meltdowns. So Kuma is on, or vice versa. They're both within a couple of miles of multiple ongoing nuclear meltdowns. They're actually dumping the soil into farmers' fields and growing food there. Because we cover this stuff all year long, year after year after year. Do you got any idea how despicably twisted and sadistically sick that actually is? The whole world should be fighting the nuclear meltdowns, not the scum, degenerate monster known as the nuclear industry covering it up. The site of the triple, it's actually 4 plus 8 fuel pools that melted down. 4 reactors. Reactor 4 is omitted from this equation there, because they were changing some of the fuel rods. And what they do when they change fuel in a reactor is you take out a percentage of it, leave the rest in the reactor, and then put the more fuel in on top of it. So when they started, because their official story was, well, we were changing fuel, so there was no fuel in the reactor. But I can't find a single instant of that in history where they changed all the fuel to one time. It doesn't actually exist. And they'll never say the words triple nuclear meltdown, and it's supposed to be meltdowns, and you'll very rarely, but occasionally, you'll see the S assigned. The soil is not going to be transferred outside the prefecture by 2045 illegally. Since the amount of soil is massive, the Environment Ministry is planning to use the soil for public works and other projects across the entire country. From now on, we like to foster people's understanding on the reuse of the nuclear waste. They claim 14 million cubic meters of soil. This story is from a couple of days ago. The actual number, again, we see them doing this recently at claiming 14 million. The real number is between 30 million and 60 million.
There's about 60 million tons.
We'll do that again.
There's about 60 million tons of contaminated soil that's being stored, planned to be stored, outside the Fukushima Daiichi perimeter fence. So
60 million. Lie after friggin' lie after lie after lie after lie. For farmland. They're going to use the radioactive soil for farmland. Could it possibly get any more disgusting, despicable than that? I don't understand why the world is not fighting back. I don't get that. This is not very difficult to wrap your mind around. Them evil, us good. It hopes that 3/4 of the total will be reused in farmland and projects. And God help us, that'll probably be schoolyards. A demonstration project to grow vegetables on farmland using such soil. It's obviously written by the nuclear industry on top of that. Has already started in a Fukushima village of Lydiat. Projects to utilize the soil for road construction have been scrapped due to opposition from local residences. In May of last year, the kooky, twisted, sadistic ministry started holding meetings to discuss the recycling of such soil. Not radioactive soil anymore, but such soil. with the general public to win wider understanding. Such events took place in Tokyo. And the next session is scheduled to begin this month in Fukuoka. And the Furuba, which is at the nuclear wasteland itself, mayor, stressed that electric generated by Fukushima plant has been consumed in the greater Tokyo area, and that reuse of the soil collected through decontamination will not proceed unless people who benefited from the Fukushima plant understand that fact. In other words, they want to take the soil to Tokyo. Calling it tainted soil, you really got to be some kind of evil to work for the nuclear industry. You really got to be some kind of twisted, demented, soulless creature to work for the nuclear industry. It's absurdness in its genocide. 11 years later, the fate of Fukushima reactor cleanup uncertain. Uncertain. Okuma, Japan. Which, by the way, has been evacuated for 11 years, but still has a newspaper. 11 years after Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant ravaged by a meltdown. Not meltdowns, a meltdown. Most of the radioactive debris blasted by the hydrogen explosion is cleared, and the torn buildings have been fixed. Yeah, you heard right. They're claiming now that the buildings have been fixed. And that's not the only article that is claiming this. They've been fixed. Which reminds me of Arnie Gunnarsson. Arnie Gunnarsson wants you to believe the building looks like that, not like this. It'll always look like that. So when are you going to go fix Chernobyl? You just absurdness. The torn buildings have been fixed. Evil. Like, people don't appreciate what evil. By the way, this is Mari Yamaguchi. Remember the name on the headlines I was reading to you about the tanks in 2013? Mari Yamaguchi. All the biggest lies come out through Associated Press, typically have Mari Yamaguchi's name on them. This is a story from a couple of days ago, March the 13th, 2 days ago. Mari Yamaguchi. Most of the radioactive debris blasted have been cleared and fixed. The buildings have been fixed. During a recent visit by journalists from the Associated Press to see the first-hand cleanup, one of the world's worst nuclear meltdowns. This is by far the worst nuclear meltdown. If you combined all nuclear meltdowns, they still don't add up to Fukushima. Thank goodness, I should say, I suppose. Helmeted men wore regular work clothes and surgical masks at a nuclear meltdown, did you? Instead of previous required hazmat coveralls. By the way, the coveralls we're talking about are paper suits, and TEPCO claimed they burnt 7,000 of those paper suits each day on site in the incinerators. And in reality, there's never been 7,000 people on that site. It's lie after lie after lie, and you can't keep up with it. They say 900 tons of melted fuel remains inside the 3 damaged reactors. Because they're claiming they got the fuel out of the pool of reactor 4 and reactor 3, which is absurdness because that was obviously gone on day 2 and 3. And that each of the reactors have 800 tons. And the significance of a ton is absurdness for all the species on the planet, by the way. Calling them damaged or destroyed, say 900 tons, when the fuel pools would have each had several times dead. And he claimed 10 times the amount of damaged fuel removed in 3 Mile Island cleanup and partial core meltdown. They're very scripted. These lies are the same lies typically we're hearing for 76 years. Generation after generation of regurgitating the same lie. The Spider-Man and the Hulk were created specifically to brainwash you and your children and your loved ones. They say 3 reactors were offline and survived. Pictures released last year in January was 736 pictures, and you can see those pictures in my playlist. I actually done video presentations on the pictures because nobody else even acknowledged they exist. And 736 pictures from a drone originally. And all the reactors were redacted, except for reactor 5. Reactor 6 and the pump house were redacted. And the common spent fuel pool with over 10 million pounds confirmed in it. But it was standard to store 3 to 4 times more than that in the pool because you don't have a repository. And everything is kept on site. Through a fort building suffered a hydrogen explosion. No, it was 100% meltdown of the reactor core in building 4 and the fuel pools melted down, detonated. Hydrogen is caused by the meltdown, by the way. Again, you see him talking about 160,000 residents, 165 the last time, right? This one is 160. It was actually 480,000 that evacuated. They say that the reactor cores in 1, 2, and 3 largely fell to the bottom of the primary containment vessel. This is reactor 4. The containment vessel is right here. The fuel pools are at the very top of the building, both of those pools. This is the reactor core. It doesn't exist. It's completely gone. And reactor 3 and reactor 2 and reactor 1. In fact, here's a better picture of reactor 3. Does that look like a 190-foot building to anybody? They say the water is pumped up and treated and partially recycled as cooling water. Pouring it back, you can't treat this stuff. You can't filter this stuff. Or everybody worldwide would be doing it all the time. Because as it goes into the filter after about 20 minutes, you can never get in the building again because the filter now is thousands of sieverts. After a single day, it's going to be millions of sieverts. You can't move the filter. You can't change the filters. You can't pick the filters up and move them somewhere on site because it's a lethal dose trying to get within a couple of 100 feet of it. And again, 1,000 tanks, as I showed you a couple of times, they had 1,000 tanks in 2013. Again, they talk about tritium. There's no such thing as tritium from a nuclear reactor, by the way. It's tritium-3H. And they say it's not harmful in small amounts, but it actually is. It's so powerful, they use it in nuclear weapons. It doubles the capacity of a nuclear bomb. You take a typical nuclear bomb, add tritium, you double the ability of the bomb. And all 63 radioactive isotopes selected for treatment can be reduced to safe levels. Again, we're not seeing this anywhere on the planet. Only this fable from a known scumbag industry in Japan. Japan needs to be ostracized from the rest of the planet. They're murderers. They're shipping food worldwide non-stop at an accelerated pace each year from the nuclear meltdown area where they never stop growing food. I'm just trying to save you and your friends and your families and your loved ones a nightmare. I don't know why. Because I got a conscience, maybe. Because nobody else will do it, maybe. Or because it's the right thing to do. Why won't you do something good for yourself and your family and ostracize Japan? Don't have any of their product in your home. Is that really a difficult thing to do? Or would you buy food from Chernobyl nuclear meltdown area? I just despise perpetual lawyers, let alone lawyers. TEPCO is empty to spent fuel for number 3 and number 4 reactor. Again, this is outrageous, unbelievable, but expected propaganda from the anniversary. Fuel pools, this is reactor 3 depiction, that's reactor 3 over there, don't exist. You can't remove fuel from a pool that don't exist. Here's another picture of reactor 3. You need to make a stand. Do you want to live or do you want to die? That's reactor 4. The fuel pools are at the top of the buildings to the right. Those depictions, 2 of them are fuel pools. And they're over capacity in absurdness because you don't have a repository anywhere on the planet, let alone Japan. This study will make you sick to your guts. Prevalence of non-communicable diseases. This was a last year's study, November. Prevalence of non-communicable diseases among healthy male decontamination workers after the Fukushima nuclear disaster. You see all the mass murderers assigned their name and done the study. So overall, 123 male decontamination workers were enrolled. 93, 75% were drinkers. And 84%, or 68%, 84 of them were smokers. So the study says contamination workers in the disaster-struck area have higher risk of developing non-communicable diseases like heart problems and liver problems and lung problems, and respiratory and pituitary and thyroid and adrenaline and Alzheimer's, dementia, autism, diabetes, possibly due to their original health status. In other words, like Robert Gale says, it's like 15 minutes of kayaking. It's harmless to work at a nuclear meltdown. That's what he went there and told the workers, don't worry about it. It's like eating peanut butter or driving in New York or driving 600 kilometers on the highway. How is that acceptable? How is that even possible? But how is that acceptable? That they will actually travel there and convince the workers that it's harmless. And that their biggest issue is drinking and smoking. Fukushima Ecolab branding insensitive. This was a study as the organizers of a symposium on the genetic effects of radiation following the Fukushima disaster. We object strongly to the headline of your report, Fukushima offers real-time Ecolab. Nature, which was study here. Back to that other study. They object strongly to the headline of your report, Fukushima offers real-time ecolab. It conveys a lack of empathy among researchers for the suffering of the people and the animals affected by the Fukushima power plant. If you go over and read that actual synopsis, the effects of such exposure in humans are poorly understood, when they're not. They've been killing beagle dogs and beagle puppies at Loveless Respiratory Research Institute in New Mexico for over 50 years. No animal has ever survived radiation. Brenner adds that the risks mainly of cancer are small. There's 1,800 illnesses. It's not just cancer. And then they quote the World Health Organization, which is United Nations. Identified hot spots in Fukushima Prefecture where it is predicted that children may experience a slight increase overall risk of some rare cancers, like the thyroid. Again, that's what they do. They direct you to this one narrative only over everywhere you go, over and over and over and over. If they can secure the necessary funding, that has proven enormously difficult to study the effects on a human. Where data on the effects of radiation are subjects to heated debate and arguments over the use of nuclear energy. And it's not heated debate, it's controlled opposition with propaganda machines. There's no real debate. We've never seen a real debate. You can't show me a real debate. You can show me a fake debate with controlled opposition, but you can't show me a real one. What Fukushima data do exist are sporadic and contested. Unbelievably contested. But not by honest and genuine, sincere people or academics, but by scum, degenerate public relation firms, by aka monsters. Other scientists take issues with the reports of ecological harms from Fukushima. They say that Otaki's research is flawed because wing shape and butterfly traits vary naturally with geography. And the study's sensational claims should not be used to scare the local population into the erroneous conclusion their exposures to the relatively low environmental radiation doses put them at health risk. The numbers across the country are shocking numbers, are catastrophic numbers. And then, who wrote it? Timothy Jorgensen, who I called out several years ago at my other site on a presentation he had about Fukushima, where he told lie after lie after lie after lie, and I called him on each one of the lies. Richard Wakeford, an epidemiologist at the University of Manchester, United Kingdom, by proxy, you're going to be a scumbag, thinks that ecological research on Fukushima disaster effects will prove as confounding as efforts to detect health efforts in humans exposed to low doses of radiation. First off, these are not low doses of radiation we're talking about. And that the evidence for this is incredibly overwhelming, and it is impossible for honest people not to be aware of the actual harm caused by radiation. Let me give you one example. In this one community in Japan, that the death rates might give the creeps to some people, in a single month, there was 12,700 extra people dying of heart attacks than is normal in that month. That's not the only deaths, obviously. That's holy smoke stuff. Out of every 100,000 newborn and neonates in the entire country of Japan, out of 100,000, 14.2% need open heart surgery for congenital malformations. Many ecosystems and their species are altered after human evacuations in ways that have nothing to do with radiation, he says. You got to be some incredibly evil, insidious creature to be that disconnected. To make your paycheck, you got to go and put your name and pretend there's no adverse effects to millions of people so you can get a paycheck. And you want people to look at you and call you a human. Wayne says post-Fukushima research needs more support to boost its quality. Let me explain to you this way. I got a better way, hopefully. I do this all day, every day, because I can't handle the planet being exterminated like this. I can't handle the constant, relentless, hideous propaganda and lies and deception and pain and genocide and ecocide and omnicide. I really can't. I can't sit in silence. I don't know how to do that. And if anybody thinks what I do is easy, you got to give your head a shake. And when it falls off, give it a big kick. What I do is endless, brutal amount of work all day, every day. It's an endless, brutal, hideous amount of work to do what I'm doing each day. You see these, whenever you see these black bags, that's 1-ton bags of radiation. So the person that's grown food there to sell should be arrested. It's the same with this one. Growing food right alongside of 1-ton bags of radiation for market. When you got 150,000 sites where they picked up 1-ton bags of radiation, 150,000 of these sites. They're not picking it up because they're bored. They're not picking it up because it's cheap either. To say there's no adverse side effects, the contempt I have for you, I can't actually say it out loud. Fukushima unpaid soil research effort. We and other particle physicists working voluntarily in Fukushima, Japan, where people were evacuated in 2011 because of a nuclear accident, are neither opportunists nor adventurers. As you quote, they're responding to that article. Hang on. Our goal is to enable local farmers' livelihoods eventually to be restored in a nuclear wasteland. You know why they didn't continue to harvest food in Ukraine? So their goal is to murder you. That's their goal. And then the victims are endless. Yeah, my apologies. 3/11 disaster, lasting scars. The 17-year-old killed herself because during the tsunami, this little child who was 6 years old didn't take her regular route. And her parents went looking for her, couldn't find her, and got caught in the tsunami. And was continued to raise in the nuclear wasteland. This is what really insidious is the nuclear industry. By all these lies I showed you tonight, the idea of the lies is to stop people from moving out of a nuclear wasteland, to stop people from taking their children away from harm. That's what a scientist does, see? The scientist, when you hear the word scientist, when I hear the word scientist, I usually spit. The word scientist is the same as the word mass murderer to me. And I have the evidence for those assertions. That's what a scientist is. They're mass murderers. They're not good people. They're not even people. They're the opposite of what a person is. Triggering meltdowns in 3, again, you got to go looking for the word, of its 6 reactors. It's 4 reactors. Again, I'm not going to read you through the propaganda. But Elon Musk, I'm going to try to contact him. And he had a challenge that he'll go anywhere in Fukushima and eat the food grown there. He'll go anywhere in Fukushima and eat the food grown there, except for here, and there, and here, and here, and here, and here, and here, and there, and every other place. Why emission-free nuclear energy is still a taboo topic in Australia? Well, first off, to call nuclear emission-free means you're a scumbag and that legally you should be put down because you're not safe to have on the planet with humans. India's radioactive bazaar, constant theft of nuclear material, more lies and endless lies. This is a doozy. This is where there are allegedly men in hazmat suits. First off, in order to protect yourself from radiation, the suit needs to be about 4 feet thick of gravel or wood. Inside a facility with equipment to remove the radioactive material from the contaminated water at the Fukushima Daiichi. You're talking about 2.2 sieverts per liter. You're pouring water over ongoing nuclear meltdowns. The biggest byproduct of that is going to be the curium isotope. And curium isotope, you need lead shielding 20 times thicker than you do for plutonium, which is named after the devil on top of that. Nuclear energy isn't as dangerous as you think. We shouldn't give up on it yet. Which is Elon Musk. Where's the math? We considered that there was almost no rice exceeding 100 becquerels a kilogram produced in Fukushima. They had 11 million pounds in 2013, which meant 11 million bags. And the bags are 50-pound bags. We talked about this last night, which is 550 million pounds, which is 275,000 tons, which meant they didn't stop growing it there during the meltdowns. Rafael Grossi, the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, aka a demon, an actual demon. That's what the International Atomic Energy Agency is. They're actual demons. Okay, how did we do tonight, by the way? Let's look at the poll here. We're going to close the poll. We're going to close the poll. There's 47 votes. Somebody actually voted no. Must be a mistake. Can't be anybody out there that's stupid. They done it on purpose. I suppose there could be a pro-nuclear showed up here. They wouldn't have stayed around very long because the truth is not something they want to hear. They're used to living in their lies, not in the truth. So 47 votes, that's really good. 34 thumbs up. Uncensored. You'll notice when the show is over, Comments won't show up for 12 hours. I'll basically get next to no thumbs up for the next 12 hours. And that I only get a subscriber every 3 or 4 days if I'm lucky. There's a whole list of the ways they're censoring me. It's hard to appreciate it, but no, they don't do what they're doing to me to anybody else that I can tell. It's stunning, actually. So 48 votes, 98%. Stephen Young donated $50 last night. Stephen Young, thank you. And I'm not going to get the drill bits that I was originally going to get when I raised the rest of the money. I'm actually going to get a set of cobalt steel bits. And they're on sale right now for $89, regularly $160 plus taxes, which is 15% here in Canada. And it's 27 bits all the way up to a half an inch. And they'll actually drill repeatedly through cast iron, stainless steel, without breaking and without losing their edges. You got to use a cutting oil with it. I'm going to have to get them instead of the titanium, because that's the right thing to do, right? We got all kinds of bolts that got to get drilled to get them back out of where they're stuck. And we got all kinds of stuff that got to get done with drill bits. It's a big operation we have here. We got research expeditions coming up again in a couple of months. Okay, turn that up a little tiny bit. Okay, what we're going to do is and do a shout out for anybody that happened to be in the comments section tonight, and everybody that's watching else. Hugs for you and your friends and your families and your loved ones. Sandra, Peaceware, Port Angeles. Dana Nasana. Hi, Dana. Brandon, Daryl, Obsolete Optics, Stephen Young, hugs for Stephen. He's doing therapy 3 days a week, trying to recover he's got a long way to go, folks. Shayla White, hi Shayla, popped in. Albert. And I'm just doing a shout out to the comments section. John 2H, Provoke, and let me see here. Chet Austin, Kevin Blanche dropped in. Andrew B, which is CFINSTR, is Andrew, folks. Richard. Zephran Cochran, thank you. James Lucet, hey buddy. Yeah, Kevin should have called in earlier for sure. I didn't see him there. I would have gave him a quick shoot. If there's such a thing with Kevin. I gotta let him talk when he's talking. Let him get it off his chest. Nancy Sand. Zephran says, yeah, I noticed a lot of animals and insects disappearing over the last number of years. And that's why we do the research expeditions. Not because it's fun or easy, I can assure you. Or cheap, because it's not. It's absurdness. Just trying to keep this operation at this stage moving forward is madness. It's actually madness. You got to burn money constantly. Enough to make me sick. But the work got to get done. John Curtis. We're almost through the names here. Yeah, almost through. I'm just scanning names. I'm trying not to read the comments, but sometimes I do. Did I get everybody? Yeah, whales are starving to death. I'm just almost through the names down to the most recent comments here. Give me a moment. Darlene. Timber. That's okay, Timber. Adrian Johnson, thank you. David Allen. Stephen Young again, thank you, Stephen. And hugs for you, my friend. Cody. There you go. Looks like I got him. Looks like I got everybody. As usual, I probably missed somebody. I'll just scan back up briefly. No, looks like I got everybody for a change. That happens to be in the comments section. Everybody else, hugs for you. Particularly those who are watching it now. And certainly those who are watching this later, tonight, tomorrow, next day. And so you're not going to see my videos get big numbers ever. Even though a lot of people have been watching me for many years, they're not just going to disappear. They're going to find me, keep watching. This is hardcore. This is advanced classes, and you don't need much of an education to understand it because I break it down with the documentation. It's an absurd, it's a ridiculous amount of work. I wouldn't have it no other way. The truth is too important. The truth is too important. And the more of you that are articulated on this subject, the better the planet is. They can't shut us all up, see? So I keep doing what I'm doing, plus the research, because that's a great foundation for everybody that's coming through. If they're genuine and sincere and honest and trying to comprehend it, you'll get a handle on it if you visit this site a few times. You'll get your mind around it. You'll get a really good grip on it. We don't take shortcuts around here. You're welcome, Brandon. Yeah. Lots of people watch it, but the numbers are not reflected. I'm censored by the lobbyists at Alphabet, also known as Google, also known as YouTube. So we got 38 thumbs up. Okay, looks like we made it through. There's links in the description, the very bottom of the description, to donate. We can use a couple of donates in order to get some more little gear before the sale's over. And there's only two ways to donate. They're both at the bottom of the description. They're really easy, one with credit cards, one through PayPal. They're both directly linked directly to me. So you can't make a mistake. We'll see everybody tomorrow night. Yeah, don't eat the sea salt. That's a great one. And this is Tuesday, so we'll see everybody tomorrow night. Okay, we'll see everybody tomorrow night. Have a great night. Great day tomorrow, folks. Take care.